Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. As you can see by the map on your screen, we're taking it back to the pre-2020 election days, for those of you who have been around that long, for a little map and analysis video. We're going to be looking at the 2022 Senate map, and I'll be giving my race ratings for each state. I guess you can kind of look at it as the official EPO forecast as of August 20th. Now, as you can see up here, Democrats have 36 seats going into these 2022 midterms. Republicans have 29. Now, that is a major reason, or at least one of the major reasons, why Democrats are given a pretty good chance of actually holding on to their majority this November, in the Senate at least, despite the Republican-leaning national environment, and despite the fact that Republicans are overwhelmingly favored to win control of the House because of that Republican-leaning environment. The simple fact is that Democrats have less races to defend this cycle than Republicans do. And with that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to be rating every single race as solid, likely, lean, or tilt for each respective party, or just a plain old toss-up. We'll see if there are any in this video. Now, getting started with the Democrats, we're going to be going down the Pacific Coast. Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii are reliably Democratic states every presidential election year, and I don't anticipate that changing in these midterms. The only two races that might have been competitive if, say, the generic national ballot for these Senate races was R plus 10 or more would be Washington and Oregon. These are states that consistently vote for Democratic presidential candidates by 15 to 20 points, so you can see how in a very, very favorable Republican environment they may have been considered somewhat competitive, but it is not looking like that is going to be the case this November. Moving on, across the country, Illinois is a safe Democratic state. Tammy Duckworth will likely win re-election, actually almost certainly win re-election in Illinois. Vermont, Connecticut, and Maryland are safe Democratic states, as well as the Empire State of New York. That brings Democrats up to 45 seats in this prediction so far. Republicans, now it is your turn for your safe Democratic states. Idaho, Utah, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, both the regular and special Senate election, which, by the way, there is a primary runoff this Tuesday in Oklahoma for that special Senate election to determine the Republican nominee. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, and the state of Indiana. That brings Republicans up to 43, but you may have noticed that I have not marked Iowa or Alaska. Starting out with Iowa, Chuck Grassley, the Republican incumbent, is extremely old, and not many people were expecting him to run for re-election once again, but he is the president pro tempore of the United States Senate. He's incredibly popular within Iowa. I don't think he's won with less than 55% of the vote in an election in I think over 15 years. I could be wrong on that. But the point is that Iowa, with Chuck Grassley on the ballot, is actually a safe Republican state. Whereas in presidential elections, obviously it voted for Trump by 8 points both in 2016 and 2020. It would have been more of a likely or lean Republican state if Chuck Grassley were not on the ballot, and of course if it were not a midterm environment that should favor Republicans. Moving on to the state of Alaska. Now, I didn't mark this not because Democrats have any chance of winning this race, but because there is a lot of Republican infighting in the state of Alaska. Senator Lisa Murkowski, the incumbent, voted to impeach Donald Trump the second time, and she faces Trump-endorsed Kelly Tshibaka. Now, Murkowski was one of the first candidates that Trump said he would go after in these Republican primaries and try to unseat, and we won't get to actually know if he has done that until November because of Alaska's unique primary system, which is a blanket top four primary in which any combination of Democrats or Republicans can advance to the general election. You just have to finish in the top four of vote getters. Now, Kelly Tshibaka and Lisa Murkowski did both advance as expected, and they will meet again in November on the general election ballot. So we'll see what happens there. Either way, though, a Republican will win this race. That is why I am marking it as safe Republican. So that leaves us with 45 seats to the Republicans, 45 seats to the Democrats, and 10 toss-up races as of now. Now, obviously, we're going to mark these as either likely, lean, or tilt for either party, but these are 10 states that will ultimately decide control of the United States Senate this November. Starting out with Democrats. Now, one state is going to be likely for them, and that is in Colorado. incumbent Michael Bennet. I don't anticipate having any problems facing off against Republican Joe O'Dea. Now, that being said, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell did say that Republicans would campaign and try to win this race in Colorado. That may have been more of a rallying cry than an actual hopeful prospect, given that Colorado voted for Joe Biden by about 15 points in the 2020 election and is not expected to be competitive for Republicans even in this Republican national environment. That gives Democrats 46 seats now, and remember, they only need 4 more seats to reach 50, and 50 is what they need to have a majority because Kamala Harris, the Democratic vice president, casts the tie-breaking vote. Republicans need 6 more seats to reach 51. If they reach 50, they will not have a majority, unlike Democrats. Now, that being said, Republicans have 2 likely states, and that being Florida and North Carolina. In Florida, Senator Marco Rubio, the incumbent, faces off against Democrat Val Demings. Rubio won by 9 points in his last election in 2016 in a Republican-leaning national environment, one could say, and I think most people would expect him to potentially overperform that number, despite the fact that Val Demings looks very competitive in polling. Ultimately, the fact is that Florida's fundamentals point towards a Republican victory this cycle and going forward. It has moved considerably right in several statewide elections over the last 5 or so years. That is also the case in North Carolina, where former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, Democrat Cheri Beasley, faces off against U.S. Rep for North Carolina's 13th Congressional District, the Republican Ted Budd. Now, polling, once again, has looked a lot more competitive than one might expect for a state like North Carolina, which has voted Republican in the last 3 presidential election cycles. However, once again, similarly to Florida, the fundamentals just favor Republicans here, obviously as we expect a Republican-leaning national environment in this midterm cycle, as well as the fact that North Carolina hasn't voted for a Democratic Senate candidate since 2008. Both of these states are going to go in the likely Republican column, bringing them up to 47. Now it is Democrats' turn with lean Democratic states, and there's only one state that I would consider a lean Democratic state, and that is New Hampshire. Jeanne Shaheen, the Democratic incumbent in the state of New Hampshire, dodged a major bullet when Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican, opted against running for this seat. Instead, she is facing a pretty generic Republican candidate and should be expected to win re-election. If Governor Sununu had been on the ballot for the Republicans, this very well could have been in the pure toss-up column or potentially even in the tilt Republican column. Remember, just 6 years ago in 2016, Hillary Clinton only won New Hampshire by 300 votes. It is very much a swing state. That said, that gives Democrats 47 seats to the Republicans 47. And now we are down to the 6 super high-profile Senate races this cycle that both Democrats and Republicans are going to be pouring a ton of resources in. Advertisement money, campaigns, rallies. I'm sure you'll see Trump and Biden on the road campaigning for candidates in all of these races until Election Day. And the first race of these 6 that I will be giving a rating to is the state of Ohio, which I have down as lean Republican. Now, Ohio is not the kind of state that Democrats should really have any business competing in. I mean, we're talking about a state that voted for Trump by 8 points both in 2016 and 2020, and re-elected its incumbent senator, who's now retiring and leaving this seat open, Rob Portman, by 20 points in 2016. The demographics don't even favor Democrats. It's a white, working-class, Rust Belt state that has moved to the right and should continue to do so, and yet Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan is consistently outpolling J.D. Vance, the Republican Trump-endorsed candidate, in the race. Now, why is that the case? Is that polling real? That's going to be the question that a lot of people are going to be asking themselves until Election Day, especially if Ryan continues to pull ahead. I mean, we're talking about a guy that, yes, has these down-to-earth, working-class vibes to him. He's been around for about 20 years now as a prominent politician within the state of Ohio, going up against a candidate who has never held elected office. J.D. Vance is a well-known author. He's a venture capitalist. He's not someone that traditionally you would consider to be a viable candidate in an Ohio Senate race. But nevertheless, I mean, we are talking about Ohio. This is not a race that Democrats should be competitive in. If we get really close to Election Day and Ryan is still pulling ahead, maybe I'll reconsider my stance here, but it is definitely in the Republican column for now, and I feel pretty comfortable rating it as lean. Now with that, we have just 5 states remaining: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. I'm going to be going a little bit more quickly through these because there are a lot of things and factors in these races that are kind of similar, and you're going to see what I mean here in a second. But before we dive in, I just have one more little note about these races that I really want to emphasize, and that is that this far out from Election Day, no one can tell you with any certainty that these races are tilting in either direction. They are purely toss-ups. These races, according to fundamentals, according to polling, according to fundraising, are too close to call at this point. No one can say with conviction that Nevada is going to vote for Catherine Cortez Masto. No one can say with conviction that Raphael Warnock is going to fend off Herschel Walker in Georgia. You can say that he has a better chance of doing so based off of this, based off of that, or she has a better chance of doing so based off of this, based off of that. But they are really toss-ups in their purest form. That said, obviously, you guys want me to rate these races, and so I'm going to do so. And in opposite fashion from the start of this video, I'm going to go from east to west, starting out in Pennsylvania, which I have as tilt Democrat. Democratic nominee, Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, finally returned to in-person campaigning over the last weekend. It's the first time that he's done an event since he suffered a stroke back in May. He has been consistently crushing Mehmet Oz, popularly known as Dr. Oz, the Republican nominee in Pennsylvania, in polls. I mean, we've seen several polls with Fetterman up double digits, and that is really something in a state like Pennsylvania, which is, considered the swing state of them all. Routinely votes extremely close in presidential and Senate elections over the past 15, 20 years, and we're seeing a Democratic nominee blowing away his Republican opponent in what should be a Republican-leaning national environment. In fact, polling has looked so good for Fetterman that if I were to just ignore fundamentals for a second, it would be at least likely Democrat, maybe even safe Democrat. That's how good he has looked in polls as of late. But of course, you can't ignore fundamentals. That's when you get into trouble with election forecasting. We've seen polling misses time and time again. Just 2 years ago in Maine, Sarah Gideon, the Democratic nominee, led Susan Collins, the Republican, in every single poll conducted throughout the entire election cycle and ended up losing pretty comfortably. So it just goes to show, there are a lot of different factors beyond polling that go into election forecasting, especially this far out from Election Day when polls aren't usually as reliable as they are once we get closer to November. And that is why Pennsylvania is a tilt Democratic state for now. It could still move in either direction. I'm following similar logic in the state of Georgia, which I also have down as tilt Democrat. Now I want to make one thing clear. If Herschel Walker were not the Republican nominee in the state of Georgia, this would absolutely not be a tilt Democratic race. We're talking about a race here that I think most people would have assumed that after Warnock won that runoff election against Kelly Loeffler, he'd serve a 2-year term, and then Republicans would flip this race back in 2022 in a Republican-leaning environment. But that is just simply not looking like it will be the case, at least according to polling. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock is consistently running 7 to 10 points ahead of Stacey Abrams in her bid for governor against Brad Kemp. So we clearly have a lot of people that are willing to vote for Warnock, but not Stacey Abrams. And that's definitely risky given the fact that I think there are a lot of Republicans right now who, let's say, are less than reluctant to say that they're going to support Herschel Walker, but will ultimately end up voting for him in November. So that's just a dynamic to pay attention to in Georgia. It could also move in either direction over the coming weeks and months. Now, the final race that I have as tilt Democrat is Arizona. Arizona, the Democratic incumbent Senator Mark Kelly is more moderate. Arizona likes to vote for moderate candidates in Senate elections. We've seen that with Kyrsten Sinema and John McCain going back 10, 20 years now. Blake Masters, the Republican candidate, is anything but moderate. Now, obviously, he's a strong fundraiser, and this race given fundamentals in Arizona, which is a very swingy state. It only voted for Joe Biden by, I think, 0.2, 0.3, if I'm not mistaken. 2 years ago, it's absolutely in a Republican environment, should be one of the top opportunities for Republicans to pick up. But once again, we have a Republican candidate on the more fringe, extreme side of his party going up against a moderate in a state that favors moderates, especially in Senate elections. Nevada and Wisconsin are the final two states that I'm actually going to leave as pure toss-ups. In Nevada, we have a Democratic incumbent, Catherine Cortez Masto, against the former Attorney General of Nevada, Adam Laxalt. Now, unlike in Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, Laxalt is an extremely formidable candidate, and that is why you see Nevada as a toss-up compared to Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, which are traditionally considered to be a little bit more Republican than Nevada, at least on a fundamental level. Another note is that Nevada did not swing towards the Democrats between 2016 and 2020. It was one of the few swing states that did not do so. Obviously, it still voted for Biden by a very similar margin to Hillary Clinton, but it didn't see that same shift towards Democrats that you would have expected. Republicans have been lauding their chances in Nevada for at least 5 years now. There have been a lot of grassroots movements that have kind of tried to push Republican candidates over the edge here, and it hasn't quite happened yet. I could keep going on about the state of Nevada, but for time constraints, let's move on to our final state of Wisconsin. Now, I'm leaving it as a toss-up, but now that I'm saying that, I'm very tempted to label it as tilt Republican, and let me tell you why. First of all, incumbency. Ron Johnson defeated Russ Feingold twice in Wisconsin. That's something that a lot of people, obviously, Ron Johnson is not a very popular figure among Democratic circles, and he's a polarizing figure for sure within the state of Wisconsin, but he did defeat Russ Feingold twice, when a lot of people did not expect him to. Additionally, obviously, we're expecting a Republican national leading environment this November, but back in 2020, Republicans won the House popular vote in Wisconsin by over 3 points. All 8 races were contested, and it was a slightly blue-leaning year. And lastly, Wisconsin's demographics, low minority, low percentage college educated, is in line with many of the more red states across the country. And although demographics are obviously not a major component of forecasting, it is a reason why the fundamentals certainly do favor the incumbent and Republicans in the state of Wisconsin. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that. 50 seats for the Democrats, 49 for the Republicans, with Nevada as a pure toss-up. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you agree or disagree with my ratings for each of these races? Feel free to sound off, debate with each other, debate with me. Maybe I'll reply to a few of you guys in the comment section down below. Also, make sure to like the video while you're down there and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you guys all so much for watching this video, but feel free to check out more content from my channel here and tune in next time.